would like to welcome all of the viewers of this very brief video where we're going to be describing a series of statewide workshops that is focusing on the use of response to instruction in a comprehensive evaluation in determining eligibility for programs with students with learning disabilities. My name is George Batch, and I'm the co-director of the Institute for School Reform and the statewide problem-solving response to intervention project at the University of South Florida.
Hi everybody, I'm Jose Castillo, and I co-direct the Institute and the same project George just mentioned.
So Jose, you remember back in April when the DOE came to us to have conversations about doing this series of workshops, the why of it, their rationale for doing it.
I do. So back in about April, the DOE talked to us about the need to support districts to use what they have and build their capacity to implement RtI processes to not only determine eligibility for specific learning disabilities within an RtI model, but also think about how to improve their outcomes within a multi-tiered system of support. So a couple of reasons that they talked to us about that, as I recall, George. One had to do with the fact, and I didn't know this until they actually talked with us about doing this, only about 5 special ed directors in the state have been here more than 5 years, or
Exactly.
Actually 5 years. So that's less than 10% of special ed directors across the state that have been here 5 years. And as we all know, the SLD rule rolled out in 2010, and there's been updates made since 2016. So there's a need to work with folks who may be new. Additionally, one of the things we talked about is there are new assessment systems, new data management systems that folks are using because of the Florida standards or other things that they're doing, and there's a need to help them use those data and work with them to figure out how to incorporate it into their policies, practices, procedures. And we also know that students with disabilities tends to be the lowest performing group that we have in schools. And we all know that RtI and MTSS is not just about finding students eligible for special education and in an SLD category, but also how to find out what works for those students across tiers, Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. So there really was a need for us to be able to work with districts and support them, meeting them where they're at to build their capacity to do this work.
Yeah, exactly. So let's start off with what are the purposes of these workshops?
Yeah, sure. Well, I know one purpose that we've talked about is really the idea of helping districts use what are good database decision-making, evidence-based processes to make decisions using RtI for specific learning disability category eligibility, but also to really look at what works for them and to figure out how to meet their needs through the best instruction we can provide. What do you want to add to that?
Instruction is really important because, as we all know, this is one of the disability categories areas where the focus really is on the student's capacity to interact in the instructional environment. And as the districts and states, everyone here in Florida has moved to a multi-tiered system, we're also going to be focusing on how do you integrate instruction across the tiers, including specially designed instruction, in a way that, as you said, Jose, will in fact accelerate the rate of growth for students with learning disabilities.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely imperative and critical that we also focus on that. So I think we've talked a little bit about the why for this and the purpose of it. I'd love it if you talk a little bit about what the content and the format of what we're going to do is going to be this year, because it's going to be a little bit different than what we've done in the past.
Sure. The format of this is going to focus on a series of 4 statewide regional meetings and workshops, beginning in November and ending in June. And the reason we picked 4 is because with learning disabilities, the eligibility criteria really are aligned with the tiers. And the first workshop is going to focus on what is it about Tier 1 that we have to investigate data-wise, as well as decision-making. For example, have students been exposed to appropriate instruction in reading and math? So there are a series of eligibility decisions that have to be made that align perfectly with a multi-tiered system of supports. So this format is going to be 4 of these meetings. Each of the meetings will have pre-meeting webinars to provide background information to get people ready to come to these meetings. There will be a self-assessment for the district and school-based teams to complete to identify what their current practices are around the focus of that particular workshop. And those self-assessments will be used to guide us to be sure that the content is appropriate for what the districts need. There will also be some background opportunities for people to do some reading, see some videos, to really prepare them for those on-site days being very focused and meaningful to the districts. The actual format of the meetings is going to be very much case study based. We are going to ask districts, teams, and school teams to do 4 things. First, take a look at what are the eligibility criteria. Second, what are your practices around those eligibility criteria and the data that are collected? How do you make decisions about those? And are your policies, procedures, practices, and professional learning aligned with these particular areas? Throughout, we will use technology, both during the meetings and after the meetings, to help sustain this process.
Okay, great. Yeah, I thought that was a really good synopsis of what we've talked about doing and what we plan on doing. So that's a little bit about the content and format. I'm wondering, I mentioned earlier that we also really, and you talked about wanted to focus on instruction as well as a part of this, not just the eligibility process. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about why and what we're going to focus on in terms of instruction.
Sure, very, very briefly. And what is cool about this is that our focusing on instruction is actually tied to the eligibility process. So all of you out there who are watching this, you probably know that we have to document that students have been exposed to appropriate instruction in reading and math. Well, how do you do that? What data do you collect? What do effective instructional practices for diverse learners look like in Tier 1? A second eligibility component is that we have to document that we've intensified instruction and collected data on the student response to that intensification. Well, in order to intensify, we really have to have some common language, common understanding about how do you intensify instruction. And the third area is this is all about response to instruction. So we have to be sure that we link and work together to identify appropriate instruction, know how to intensify it, and know how to assess the response to it. So we are totally embedded in the instructional process in this particular disability area of learning disabilities. So one of the things that we're also going to be doing is utilizing a community of practice to improve collaboration, communication, and sustain this. Jose, talk to us a little bit about how that community of practice concept is going to be used for this series, which kind of defines this series is going to be very different than what we've done before.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. So I think in our conversations about this, one of the things we agreed on right away is that we didn't want this to be a traditional sit and get type of process where we do a lot of presenting of content, you tell folks what they ought to do, and then folks leave and have to figure that out on their own. We really want this to be an active working type of session where we use some of the things when you were talking about the format, like the pre-webinars and information to prepare people, and then set up virtual and face-to-face sessions where they're really working sessions where we help facilitate your work to apply what we're talking about based on what you're doing. But it's really about a community of practice, not only in terms of horizontally where you have your district leaders working together to figure out how to do this, and working more vertically with school teams, or a school team, I should say, in order to figure out how to maybe work with them, get their input, and test some of these things out for the goal of building capacity to apply these concepts to your district policies, practices, processes, but also to build a community of practice across districts. One of the things we hear time and time again when we do work with districts is that one of the most helpful things is to spend time talking with other districts to learn what they're doing, what challenges they're facing, how they're overcoming them, what resources they're using. So the community of practice aspect of this is going to be critical because we can only do so much by telling you what we know. We want to be able to facilitate you doing the work and learning from each other, and over time building your capacity to do RTI well, both in terms of eligibility and linking it to instruction, as George talked about.
So if you're watching this video, you're watching it because your district leadership received a letter from the Florida Department of Education outlining these workshops and who should be attending, the links for the registration process, and what have you. But Jose, why don't you give us just some next steps, some of the logistics that people would be interested in knowing as a wrap up here.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. So you've seen the letter, the communication from the DOE. Our next steps are to have a fairly brief informational webinar where we're going to give more information, a little bit more detailed about what this is going to be, and what you can expect in terms of logistics, registration, those types of things. But then we're going to have, as you talked about, 4 units approximately where we're going to do virtual webinars that are focused on some of the pre-work that's necessary, providing whatever content we need to, helping you get ready for the things you're going to need to be able to have done and bring with you to these face-to-face sessions. And then with each one, we'll have a face-to-face session that's facilitated, and again, building a community of practice to help you all apply this to what you're already doing and to build upon it. The other cool thing that we just wanted to mention, and then I think I saw you wanted to add something, so I'll let you do it, is that there's the potential with participating in this for getting CEUs, continuing education units, whatever you all call them, in your district, in service points. And we'll talk a little bit more in some of the future communications about how that process will work. But we think that's going to be something that we're going to be able to work with you to offer.
So we hope that this video gave you a little overview about what's coming up. The excitement here, once again, is this is not just about special ed. This is about improving outcomes for all students and the role that each of the tiers of instruction plays in that. This is a partnership between general ed, special ed, student support services, programs for English learning students. And we hope that this gave you a little bit of interest, and we hope to see you all at one of these sessions beginning in November. Thanks for taking the time to watch this.